"I don't owe you a bonus for paperwork," Grant Thorne said, smirking like he had single-handedly revolutionized corporate enterprise. That was the exact instant I felt my 8 years of loyalty evaporate. Grant, our newly installed manager, possessed all the strategic depth of a lukewarm coffee cup. He had been with Apex Financial Solutions for 6 weeks. 6 weeks was long enough for him to memorize his desk extension, but far too short to comprehend what anyone in our division accomplished. Most importantly, it was nowhere near long enough for him to grasp that I was the sole barrier standing between this firm and catastrophic regulatory oblivion. My name is Edward Vance, a 49-year-old senior regulatory compliance officer. For nearly a decade, I operated in a high-risk position where mistakes meant multi-million-dollar federal penalties. When Grant dropped his bombshell across his mahogany desk, I did not raise my voice. I did not wave my hands or highlight the 8 consecutive years of flawless federal audit reports sitting in my filing cabinets. I did not mention the proprietary risk monitoring frameworks I authored under Title 17 United States Code Section 106, nor did I remind him of the endless nights spent ensuring our corporate operations satisfied Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Sections 302 and 404 under Title 15 United States Code, Section 7241. Instead, I sat back in my chair, looked him in the eye, and nodded. I said calmly, "I understand." I walked out of his office, feeling as though someone had attempted to mug me with a foam pool noodle. But I was not stunned into paralysis. My mind immediately transitioned into hyper-analytical clarity, logging every word and every breach of professional ethics. Grant was a corporate parasite who believed compliance work consisted of printing certificates, filing manila folders, and acting as an office archivist. The moment he rolled into our division with restructuring mandates, he began hacking away at procedures he never bothered to comprehend. Within 2 weeks, he unilaterally halved our documentation review cycle without consulting a legal specialist. I witnessed him deleting compliance flags from a shared master spreadsheet simply because bright red cells made executive management feel anxious during presentations. Grant did not ask questions. He operated entirely on arrogant assumptions. He assumed that because Edward Vance sat quietly in meetings, Edward must not understand business strategy. He assumed that because Edward avoided dramatic self-promotion, Edward lacked leverage. What Grant overlooked was the labyrinth of federal statutes and binding covenants I maintained. Most critically, he was totally blind to the corporate governance architecture governing our crown jewel client account, an enterprise partnership representing $287 million in annual value. The ultimate insult arrived during annual incentive distribution. While compliance professionals rarely expect eye-popping equity packages, we expect fair compensation for shielding the balance sheet. Instead, at 11:48 on a Thursday evening, an automated system notification popped into my corporate inbox. It informed me that my annual performance bonus for the fiscal cycle was exactly $0.00. There was no contextual breakdown, no manager note, and no HR review attached. It was a cold declaration that my 8 years of protection were worth precisely nothing. The following morning, I entered Grant Thorne's glass office. I was entirely composed. I politely asked if there had been a technical discrepancy regarding my compensation statement. Grant leaned back in his leather chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and flashed a grin brimming with unearned authority. That was when he uttered the phrase, "I don't owe you a bonus for paperwork." I paused, allowing the silence to settle between us. I asked one final question. "Grant, how would you define my actual function within this organization?" He blinked, tapped his pen against his desk, and offered a dismissive laugh. "Honestly, Edward, I don't really know. Some kind of routine regulatory checklist thing? 8 years of architecting, certifying, tracking, and legally guaranteeing the operational integrity of this firm, and this empty suit could not even articulate my job description without relying on the word thing." I did not raise my voice. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, said, "Thank you for the absolute clarity," and walked out. But inside my chest, the final fuse had been ignited. Grant thought he had won a decisive victory. What he failed to realize was that under federal regulatory filings, I was still recorded as the sole designated compliance officer on our $287 million master client certificate. And I had no intention of saying another word. Grant Thorne immediately embarked on a grand victory tour around the building. His priority was rapid streamlining, stripping away legal safeguards, and distributing complex workloads recklessly. He transferred critical risk evaluation tasks to summer interns, cut mandatory dual authorization chains in half, and peppered department memos with empty jargon about breaking down operational silos. In doing so, he deleted shared network directories containing critical escalation protocols, transforming our compliance architecture into a minefield of unverified entries and broken hyperlinks. Through all of this reckless disruption, Grant operated under one fatal delusion. He assumed that regardless of how badly he mutilated our operational safeguards, Edward Vance would quietly continue sweeping up the debris behind him. He believed I would fix his procedural violations, update federal logs in secret, and keep the firm compliant without ever demanding recognition. For 6 days, I did maintain basic operational continuity. Then I deliberately stopped. There was no dramatic announcement and no heated dispute. I simply ceased acting as the invisible safety net. Instead, I pivoted entirely into meticulous evidence documentation. Every illegal policy bypass Grant authorized was captured and logged. Every deleted safety checkpoint was preserved in secure external backups. Every instance where he bypassed dual authorization protocols to meet artificial deadlines was archived with precise timestamp screenshot evidence and audit trails, stored on off-site cloud storage. I systematically assembled a case study of corporate negligence under Title 18 United States Code, Section 1001. Grant remained completely oblivious. He paraded around senior executive meetings bragging about how he had slashed red tape by 40%. When he passed my desk and casually instructed me to display more enthusiasm during morning stand-ups, I merely smiled and nodded politely. He failed to notice that I was no longer manually correcting his procedural errors. He only noticed spotlights, never the structural foundation keeping the roof above his head. He presumed that as long as the corporate vessel remained afloat, he must be a master navigator. Then came his ultimate administrative miscalculation. One Tuesday morning, Human Resources forwarded a formal departmental restructuring memo issued directly from Grant's desk. Effective immediately, my title of Senior Regulatory Compliance Officer had been revoked. I was officially reclassified as an Associate Compliance Analyst. My core responsibilities were stripped away and converted into basic data entry tasks deemed non-essential to core certification workflows. Grant had essentially executed a constructive demotion to save departmental budget while keeping my physical presence in the cubicle. The reclassification was a blatant insult, but it produced a profound sense of liberating clarity. By stripping away my senior title and explicitly deeming my role non-essential to certification workflows, Grant had legally released me from operational liability. I was removed from key organizational charts, excluded from executive distribution lists, and stripped of administrative authority. If I was no longer authorized to manage compliance, I was no longer legally obligated to maintain their regulatory lifeboats. While Grant was slashing through our department, he failed to check the underlying federal compliance portals that operated outside his management dashboards. Specifically, he never examined the regulatory database tracking certified designated officers for high-risk enterprise clients. Buried deep within those federal servers was one unchanging line of legal record. I was still officially listed as the designated compliance officer for our highest value client contract, the $287 million Master Enterprise Agreement. The entire validity of that contract hinged directly upon my active login, my cryptographic credentials, and my personal legal sign-off. Grant did not know this, and I was not going to educate him. I began quietly clearing out my personal belongings. I packed my desk items into a leather briefcase over several evenings. I completed my assigned low-level data entry tasks with flawless precision, remaining a polite ghost moving through an organization that had no idea it was bleeding out from within. Grant had rendered me invisible, but in doing so, he had rendered himself completely defenseless. 2 weeks after my demotion, I finalized my exit strategy. I systematically reviewed my final administrative contributions. I completed one last internal risk audit, formally identifying 7 severe regulatory compliance gaps and flagging 3 critical federal deadline thresholds floating across our operational calendar. I compiled these findings into a report titled Risk Landscape Post-Transition Third Quarter. I sent the document directly to Grant's inbox at precisely 8:03 in the morning on a Tuesday. The email read, "Please find attached pending compliance items requiring immediate executive transition." At 8:11, the system logged that Grant had marked the email as read. By 8:12, he had archived it without sending a response or forwarding it to legal counsel. He was far too busy updating his social media profile with stories about transformational leadership to read a warning memo from a demoted employee. I moved forward with absolute precision. I followed every single offboarding protocol mandated by the employee handbook. I logged my system access accounts, indexed remaining project files, and neatly arranged physical binders on my desk. I left no traps and no digital sabotage. I created a paper trail so clean that an external investigator could read it like an open book. However, I did not execute a transfer of designated compliance officer authority. In regulatory law, passing officer authority is not an automatic background script. It requires a formal legal handoff, bilateral credential revalidation, and an explicit officer resignation submission. Grant had never requested the transfer, human resources had never scheduled the protocol, and legal counsel had never followed up. I was not going to do their jobs for them. At precisely 9 o'clock on Friday morning, I dispatched a brief email to Human Resources. It read, "Please accept this communication as my formal notice of resignation, effective immediately. All offboarding procedures specified in Section 4 of the Employee Handbook have been satisfied. I wish the firm continued success." 12 minutes later, an automated HR reply confirmed receipt and noted that my network credentials would terminate at the end of the business day. I did not wait for the end of the day. I gathered my coat, walked past Grant's open door while he was talking on speakerphone, and stepped into the elevator. I left behind no drama, simply walking out while my name sat at the top of their most dangerous legal file, blinking red as the clock ticked to 0. Following my quiet departure, Grant Thorne fully embraced his role as a corporate legend. During weekly department gatherings, he routinely tossed around inflated buzzwords such as regulatory agility, lean operational framework, and paradigm optimization. He boasted that his restructuring had streamlined our division. It was an astonishing display of arrogance, considering that the only thing he had actually optimized was how quickly 8 years of institutional protection could be obliterated by an unearned executive title and a slide presentation. Grant even hosted a departmental showcase 2 weeks after my exit, presenting a slide deck titled Next Generation Compliance Vision, featuring a stock photograph of a man gazing heroically at clouds. He claimed the image represented total operational transparency. Sitting there were vice presidents and directors, none of whom understood the legal definition of a designated officer. No one questioned why the desk previously occupied by Edward Vance was now empty. No one bothered to examine the automated email response sent from my former address, which clearly stated, "Edward Vance is no longer associated with Apex Financial Solutions. For all urgent regulatory inquiries, please contact Grant Thorne directly." Grant was automatically copied on every incoming message routed to my old address. Questions he did not know he was responsible for, warnings he did not understand, and gentle pings from auditors began piling up. From the peaceful balcony of a rented coastal cottage in Maine, where I was enjoying a professional sabbatical, I observed the unfolding situation with calm detachment. Occasionally, I accessed public regulatory disclosure portals. I did not log into any private corporate systems. I merely monitored public databases accessible to any industry analyst. Sure enough, the inevitable arrived. The multinational conglomerate representing our $287 million master client contract initiated its scheduled annual compliance review. Their internal legal oversight team formally issued a request for updated regulatory documentation, specifically demanding verified certification renewals from all third-party service providers. Following standard operating procedure, That legal demand was automatically transmitted to the primary email registered under the client certification file. That email belonged to Edward Vance. Because I was no longer an employee, I did not respond. Adhering to strict compliance protocols, the client's automated verification system escalated the unanswered request to the listed departmental supervisor on record. Grant Thorne. I was not present in his office, but his reaction was entirely predictable. Fueled by ignorance, Grant undoubtedly treated the notice as a routine administrative ping. He likely replied with dismissive confidence, claiming that internal documentation updates were underway, and offering to schedule a phone call to discuss his new operational vision. What Grant failed to realize was that compliance certifications cannot be updated through pleasant phone conversations or vague emails. To legally renew a Master Enterprise Certificate tied to a high-risk financial contract, a credentialed officer must log into the secure federal portal using multi-factor biometric authentication, complete 7 mandatory operational verification steps, formally attest to active compliance under penalty of perjury, and submit an encrypted digital signature. None of those actions had been performed. None of them could be performed. Because Grant did not possess the cryptographic keys, had never been granted officer status by the board of directors, and had never bothered to ask where the master credentials resided. From my quiet retreat in Maine, I watched the unseen gears of corporate accountability grind to a halt. The legal notices from the client shifted from friendly reminders into formal warnings. The language in their correspondence transformed from routine administrative text into rigid legal demands. In regulatory compliance, the most destructive force is not deliberate malice. It is supreme incompetence combined with unbridled authority. Grant possessed both in overwhelming quantities. The 30-day mandatory recertification window for the $287 million master contract reached its 26th day. The critical alert arrived in Grant's inbox at 7:42 on a rainy Monday morning. The subject line was set in bold red text, "Urgent in order of mandatory compliance, certification expiration." 2 minutes later, Grant's administrative assistant forwarded the email to his mobile device with a brief note. "This looks extremely urgent. Should I alert legal?" Grant, recovering from a late weekend celebration, typed back a dismissive 5-word reply. "No need, I handle this." He did not handle it. At precisely 9 o'clock that morning, the lead auditor representing the master client, a legendary industry veteran named Lawrence Baxter, known for his unyielding precision and zero-tolerance policy, convened an emergency video conference. There was no casual banter. The calendar invite bore a chilling title, Master Contract Compliance Failure and Statutory Breach Implications. Attendance was marked as mandatory for all senior executives. The corporate boardroom at Apex filled rapidly. Executive legal counsel occupied one side of the massive conference table, while senior procurement directors sat opposite them. Grant walked into the room 5 minutes late, holding an organic smoothie, wearing an unbuttoned blazer, and oozing manufactured charm. "Well, team," Grant began with a wave of his hand, "let us resolve this minor administrative hiccup quickly." Auditor Lawrence Baxter did not offer a smile. He did not look up from the thick black leather binder sitting in front of him. "I will state the facts," Baxter announced, his voice echoing through the silent room. He extracted a single printed legal document and placed it in the center of the table. It was the Master Compliance Certificate governing the $287 million contract. Everyone leaned forward. Expiration date, 3 days ago. Certifying Officer of Record, Edward Vance. Status: expired in unisign, no renewal filed, no officer transition recorded, no verified compliance logs submitted for the preceding quarter. Baxter looked across the table, locking eyes with Grant like a magistrate preparing to deliver a sentence. "Our contractual covenants under federal law require continuous, active certified officer oversight for all enterprise accounts exposed to high-risk capital markets. This certificate directly governs risk thresholds, system liability coverage, and operational authorization." Grant swallowed hard, his face pale. "This is clearly an IT database synchronization delay," he blurted out. "Our digital systems are currently undergoing modern optimization." Baxter remained entirely motionless. Prior to calling this meeting, I personally contacted your chief technology officer and verified your server audit trails. Your IT division confirmed that zero compliance updates have been filed since mid-August. The system is reflecting accurate real-time data. This is not a synchronization lag. As a senior partner from internal legal shifted uncomfortably in her chair, the vice president of procurement began feverishly taking notes. Grant's ears flushed deep crimson. Auditor Baxter lifted the expired certificate using 2 fingers, holding it up like exhibit evidence in a trial. He read aloud slowly, "Designated Compliance Officer, Edward Vance." Baxter looked directly at Grant. "Mr. Vance is no longer employed by your enterprise, is that correct?" Grant stumbled over his words. "Well, yes, but he was expected to complete the administrative transition before his departure." Baxter raised an eyebrow. "According to your official human resources records, Mr. Vance submitted a formal resignation following a structural reclassification. There is no documented transition plan, no signed delegation of authority, and no submitted officer transfer application." Long seconds of agonizing silence filled the room. Baxter then slid the expired certificate across the polished wood table. It came to a stop directly in front of Grant. "Explain." Grant stared down at the document as if it were an explosive device about to detonate. He opened his mouth, closed it, cleared his throat, and attempted to summon his executive bluster. That is to say, I delegated routine operational updates to our junior compliance team." "Which junior team?" Baxter asked instantly, his voice colder than ice. Grant froze. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for a lifeline among the stone-faced executives. Sweat began to bead along his hairline. "I would need to double-check internal task allocations with HR," he stammered. "There was operational overlap during our departmental optimization." Auditor Lawrence Baxter slowly folded his hands over his binder. "Effective immediately, under Section 4 of our Master Enterprise Agreement and Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance provisions, this contract is placed under formal regulatory freeze. All scheduled quarterly disbursements totaling tens of millions of dollars are suspended indefinitely pending a comprehensive forensic audit." Across the table, Chief Financial Officer Eleanor Black stopped writing mid-word. Her face drained of all color. The lead corporate legal counsel immediately stood up, pulled out her phone, and walked out of the room to contact executive management. The vice president of procurement leaned back, stared at Grant with pure disgust, and remarked coldly, "This completely destroys our fourth quarter financial projections." Grant looked like a man drowning in shallow water. "We can fix this today," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We just need to resubmit the digital paperwork." Baxter stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked down at Grant with utter disdain. "Your organization is currently in material breach of federal compliance standards and contractual covenants. You will receive formal written notification of suspension before 5 o'clock. Baxter picked up his briefcase and exited the boardroom without another word. In the suffocating silence that followed, no one spoke. Grant reached into his pocket with trembling hands and pulled out his phone. He searched his contacts for Edward Vance. My personal mobile number had been disconnected weeks ago. He attempted to send an urgent email to my corporate address, only to receive the immediate automated bounce back. Edward Vance is no longer with the company. He stared at his phone screen, the expired compliance certificates sitting before him like a tombstone, marking the grave of his corporate career. For the first time in his life, Grant Thorne was completely speechless. The official contract freeze order was formally issued at 3:12 that afternoon. It consisted of a single devastating sentence copied directly to Executive Legal Counsel, Procurement, and the Board of Directors. All enterprise account activities and financial disbursements associated with Master Agreement 774 are hereby frozen pending regulatory investigation. There were no exclamation points and no emotional flourishes, just the cold digital reality of $287 million turning into solid ice. The immediate operational fallout was catastrophic. Procurement was hit first. Across the building, phones began ringing incessantly. All vendor payments tied to the master contract were halted instantly. A junior procurement manager broke down in tears after realizing she had just authorized a 7-figure hardware purchase order that was now unbacked by capital reserves. Next came the legal department. An emergency memorandum was broadcast to executive leadership bearing the subject line: critical exposure warning, material contractual breach. The internal email contained phrases such as non-compliance liability, statutory misrepresentation, and criminal spoliation of evidence, terms that signify that the foundation has crumbled. By 4 o'clock, the board of directors had convened an emergency executive session. A private forensic audit group consisting of CFO Eleanor Black, general counsel, and external risk consultants began investigating how Apex Financial Solutions had arrived at the brink of ruin. They searched for the individual legally registered as the designated compliance officer. There was only one name, one login credential, and one signature associated with the master compliance filings: Edward Vance. At that exact moment, I was sitting inside a sunlit corner cafe 30 miles away from corporate headquarters, enjoying a fresh croissant and a warm cup of espresso. On the table before me sat an executive employment contract from a premier rival financial enterprise. They had offered me a vice president position, overseeing enterprise risk, double my previous salary, complete remote operational flexibility, full corporate equity, and a signing bonus of $47,000. My personal phone vibrated on the marble table. The caller ID displayed Grant Thorne. I allowed the call to ring until it went silent. I did not pick up, nor did I check for voicemail. Seconds later, a text message popped up on the screen. Edward, please call me immediately. It is an absolute corporate emergency. We need to talk. I locked the screen, took another sip of espresso, and felt a profound sense of peaceful resolution. They had finally realized the truth. The quiet compliance architecture they dismissed as useless administrative fluff was the structural bedrock holding up their entire enterprise. Back at Apex corporate headquarters, total panic was morphing into institutional paralysis. An ambitious HR manager tried to bypass protocol by attempting to manually retro-date a new compliance certification form. However, the secure federal portal required multi-factor biometric authentication from the original registered officer to validate structural modifications. That meant they required my private security key, my physical authorization token, and my encrypted digital signature. They possessed none of those assets. Even worse, the system architecture prevented the creation of a new designated compliance officer without verified confirmation that the previous officer had been formally off-boarded through proper regulatory channels. Because Grant had never initiated the legal officer transition, the portal flagged all attempted administrative overrides as fraudulent access attempts. When corporate legal asked Grant for a copy of the formal officer transition plan, he could only offer blank stares. When CFO Eleanor Black asked how many other major client certificates still listed Edward Vance as the sole certifying officer, the room fell dead quiet. At 2:04 in the morning, an email arrived in my personal inbox sent from Grant's personal account. The subject line read, "Quick professional consultation request." The message body was desperate. "Dear Edward, I hope you are doing well. I am reaching out to see if you might be available for a brief paid consulting session regarding our master compliance certificate protocols. Nothing complex, just a quick bit of guidance to help us synchronize system records. I completely understand if you are busy, but I would greatly appreciate your expert assistance. Warm regards, Grant." He had even added a cheerful smiley face emoji at the end of the text. This was the exact same individual who, less than a month prior, had smirked across his desk and informed me that he did not owe me a bonus for paperwork. This was the man who told senior leadership that my senior compliance role was non-essential data entry overhead. I did not write a reply. Instead, I forwarded the email directly to my legal counsel with a brief note. "This is the executive who reclassified my position and denied my earned compensation. Please handle accordingly." Within 30 minutes, my attorney dispatched a formal legal notice to Apex Financial Solutions and Grant Thorne personally. The letter was cold, precise, and razor-sharp. "Please be advised that Mr. Edward Vance is not available for consulting services. Direct all future communications exclusively to this law firm." Any unauthorized attempt to solicit Mr. Vance's participation in resolving your firm's regulatory noncompliance will be treated as an unlawful violation of professional boundaries and evidence of constructive discharge liability. I did not have to lift a finger. The legal architecture I had respected for my entire career was now operating as my impenetrable shield. The corporate private jet, carrying Chief Executive Officer Montgomery Cross, touched down at the executive airport just after dawn on Thursday morning. The second the aircraft wheels made contact with the tarmac, Cross turned on his mobile device. It instantly lit up like a slot machine, delivering a jackpot, displaying 117 unread text messages, 9 high-priority legal alerts, 3 urgent voicemails marked CEO Eyes Only, and an escalating digital message thread titled, Critical Regulatory Breach, Edward Vance. Officer Step Cross did not even allow his chauffeur to complete loading his luggage before barking a command. Drive directly to corporate headquarters immediately. By the time he stormed into the glass-walled executive conference room at 8:52 that morning, 3 senior figures were standing in tense silence. CFO Eleanor Black, Chief Legal Counsel, and Grant Thorne. Grant looked entirely undone. His tie was crooked, his face pale, and his shirt drenched in cold sweat. He looked like a man who had tied his execution knot and was waiting for the trapdoor to drop. Situation report. CEO Montgomery Cross demanded, slamming his leather briefcase onto the table without setting down his phone. CFO Eleanor Black did not offer an introductory summary. She simply handed him a printed sheet of paper. Legal counsel stared silently at the carpet. Grant stared intently at his shoes. CEO Cross scanned the paper once, scanned it a second time, and then read the text aloud in a voice laced with growing fury. Master Enterprise Agreement 774. Designated Compliance Officer Edward Vance. Status: expired and revoked. Cross looked up, his eyes narrowing into slits. And why was this certificate allowed to expire without a registered replacement officer? No one answered. The silence in the room was deafening. Cross slowly turned his gaze toward Grant. Edward Vance departed this enterprise 5 weeks ago. Where is the formal officer transition documentation? Grant opened his mouth, producing one of the most disastrous verbal responses in corporate history. Well, sir, I operated under the assumption that IT would handle digital credentials. I delegated routine data entry to junior staff, and HR never flagged an officer gap, so I assumed. CEO Cross did not raise his voice. That was the most terrifying aspect of the confrontation. He did not yell or smash his fists on the table. His rage was cold, dense, and subterranean. Did you conduct a formal exit interview with Edward Vance prior to his departure? Grant stammered nervously. No, sir, but he was not particularly communicative after departmental optimization. I mean, after his role was reclassified, he simply what? Cross interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. I did not consider his position essential to core revenue operations, Grant squeaked out. A long beat of silence filled the room. Then CEO Montgomery Cross asked the single question that would legally destroy Grant Thorne's career. Please tell me you paid him his earned annual bonus. Grant's voice shriveled into a barely audible whisper. We reclassified his title to associate analyst to save departmental budget. His role was determined to be non-revenue generating, so his incentive allocation was set to $0.00. CEO Cross slowly turned to Chief Legal Counsel. What is our current legal exposure? Legal counsel replied promptly. The master client has issued a formal notice of contractual suspension. External auditors have initiated a forensic review under Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance standards. If the client officially terminates the master agreement, it will trigger mandatory public financial disclosures, cause an immediate collapse in investor confidence, and potentially expose the firm to shareholder derivative lawsuits under breach of fiduciary duty laws. CEO Cross nodded once, a sharp motion reminiscent of a guillotine blade dropping. He turned back to Grant, whose face had gone completely ghost white. You stripped his bonus. Yes? You excluded him from strategic meetings? Thought it was efficient? You revoked his senior title, reassigned his workload, yet left his personal name and signature registered as the sole legal shield protecting a $287 million contract. Grant could not formulate a word. He stood paralyzed under the CEO's glare. So, Cross continued with lethal precision. You fired the one executive who maintained our legal authorization, and you were too arrogant to ask what systems he controlled. He did not warn you? He was not obligated to warn you. Cross shouted, his voice exploding across the room. It was your legal duty as a manager to know. You cut the power lines and then blamed the electrician for the darkness. The room fell into absolute stillness. Effective immediately, CEO Cross declared coldly, you are terminated for cause, gross negligence, and breach of fiduciary duty. Turn in your security badge, hand over your corporate phone, and vacate these premises instantly. Security will escort you out of the building. Grant's voice cracked in panic. Wait! Can't we call Edward? Can't we offer him whatever money he wants to fix this? CEO Cross looked at Grant with pure contempt. You had your chance to value Edward Vance, and you decided his expertise was worth $0. Now your career at this firm is worth precisely the same. The master client officially terminated the $287 million contract at 10:37 on Thursday morning. There were no further negotiations and no second chances. A two-line formal communication from the client's legal team sealed the company's fate. Certification noncompliance remains unresolved. Master Agreement 774 is terminated effective immediately. The financial damage was swift and devastating. Revenue projections were slashed by 40% within hours. Corporate stock fell 9% by the close of trading on Friday and dropped an additional 14% by Monday afternoon. External regulatory bodies launched formal inquiries into the firm's internal governance controls under Sarbanes-Oxley provisions. Grant Thorne was escorted from the building by security guards, holding a small cardboard box containing his desk items. He received no severance package, no transitional benefits, and no professional reference. The official termination entry logged in his personnel file read, terminated for cause, gross negligence, and material fiduciary failure. I did not gloat, nor did I post celebratory messages on social media. I simply focused on my new executive role at my new firm, enjoying a spacious corner office, a dedicated compliance staff, and an executive leadership team that recognized the indispensable value of legal precision. 3 weeks after the collapse of Apex Financial Solutions, a courier arrived at my new office lobby carrying an elegant glass vase containing pristine white orchids. There was no corporate logo attached, only a simple handwritten card that read, "Thank you for your dignified silence." That evening, I logged into my personal banking application and reviewed my latest account statement. An electronic funds transfer had cleared successfully. Direct deposit, executive signing bonus, $47,000.00. I leaned back in my leather chair, looked out at the city skyline, and smiled softly. I whispered into the quiet room, "You don't owe me a bonus for paperwork, but the market certainly does." I saved the digital deposit confirmation to my permanent records, because no matter what arrogant managers believe, keeping the receipts is always good compliance practice.